好，各位自由亞洲電台嘅觀眾，大家好啊！咁我係胡海文。今日係10月1號啦，大家都知今日就係中共建政71週年嘅日子。咁喺全球超過60個城市啦，其實都舉辦咗一個叫做11全球反共日嘅集會㗎。咁我其中而家咧身處嘅地方就係喺美國華盛頓嘅國會山莊前面呢一場嘅集會啦，可以話係呢一個嘅全球反共日嘅規模最大嘅一場集會啦。咁你可以見到現場其實呢就係原定大概11點鐘會開始，咁現場就已經係開始進行緊一啲嘅佈置啊 set up 嘅。你可以見到一陣間呢就會喺一個台上邊啦，有唔同種族佢哋嘅反對共產黨嘅領袖咧，佢哋就會上台上邊去進行一個演說啦，表達佢哋嘅訴求㗎。咁今日咧會見到嘅唔同種族嘅人呢，就包括有藏族人啦、維吾爾族人啦、香港人啦、內蒙古人啦、台灣人啦等等㗎。咁佢哋咧都係嚟咧表達向美國國會啦同美國政府咧係表達啦，希望抵制中共嘅政權、中共嘅極權，同埋咧係要關注中國嘅人權問題㗎。包括啦西藏嘅人就認為啦，中共就係殘酷咁樣佔領咗佢哋嘅領土，咁而維吾爾族人呢，亦都係咧反對咧中共咧喺新疆嗰度建立咗好多嘅集中營㗎。咁喺現場咧，你見到好多嘅凳啦，一陣間就會有唔同嘅維吾爾族人啦嚟到呢一度，戴上一啲嘅手銬去扮演喺新疆集中營嗰個情況㗎。咁現場咧其實亦都係有好多嘅人啦已經到達，帶咗佢哋嘅旗幟嚟啦，亦都有一啲嘅擺置嘅。例如咧，我哋可以望下，嗰度咧係有一啲嘅，呢邊已經見到有好多人咧就嚟到帶咗佢哋嘅旗幟啦，帶咗佢哋嘅標語啦，你都可以見到啦，有一個係擺設咧就係模擬啦喺新疆集中營裏邊嘅一啲殘酷審訊嘅刑具㗎。咁而前邊咧，亦都係有一啲咧展示咗喺強迫墮胎同埋絕育中心嘅設備。咁而另外咧，我哋見到咧係啦，現場有好多記者啊，同埋咧示威人士已經帶咗佢哋旗幟嚟啦。再去到咧集會現場咧，呢邊亦都係有一啲嘅設施啦，就係展示咗咧新疆佢哋嘅孤兒院同埋一啲嘅強制勞動，佢哋嗰個情況係點樣㗎？咁就係希望咧話俾大家聽，究竟新疆嗰個情況而家係點？希望喚起大家嘅關注㗎。我諗講講呢一陣間嗰個成個活動嗰個流程大致會係點啦？預計呢係11點鐘左右呢，就會係有唔同嘅團體嘅領袖呢，就會上到嚟呢度呢就發言。咁就包括係有藏族嘅人啦、維吾爾族人啦、香港人啦、內蒙古人啦同埋台灣人㗎。咁而我哋了解啦，前香港眾志嘅常委敖卓軒呢，亦都會嚟到呢度發言㗎。咁今次呢一個嘅全球反共日啦，喺全世界超過60個城市都有舉辦㗎。除咗喺美國華盛頓呢度啦，其實喺美國嘅其他城市，即係包括芝加哥啦、洛杉磯啦，亦都會有舉辦呢一個嘅反共日㗎。咁而華盛頓呢一個嘅集會咧，規模就比較大啦，因為咧現場係見到咧已經有好多人喺度聚集啦。主辦單位亦都話啦，係有超過100個嘅維吾爾嘅人士啦，會嚟到呢一度去扮演一個喺集中營裏邊嗰個情況，希望咧就係喚起大家關注㗎。咁我哋現場亦都見到啦，有啲人咧就已經係揸住咗啲嘅旗幟啦，寫住 Free Tibet 啦，就係解放西藏。咁就希望咧大家咧關注西藏嘅情況㗎。咁除咗係有唔同嘅 團體嚟到示威之外啦，其實都仲有3位嘅國會議員啦，就包括係 10.1啦，佢一陣間都會嚟到呢度發言㗎，為大家咧係送上一啲嘅支持。咁我哋亦都會喺現場咧同大家留意住國會議員啦，究竟係點樣睇咧？而家對中共嗰個嘅政策啊，或者係有啲乜嘢嘅方法咧，去支援呢一班嘅人士㗎。嗰邊咧就會見到係一啲嘅內蒙古嘅人士啦，佢哋亦都係着上咗佢哋嘅傳統嘅服飾嚟到呢度咧，就係去表達佢哋內蒙古嗰個嘅情況㗎。大家都知道啦，內蒙古咧最近咧係有好多嘅漢化教育啊，即係包括佢哋嗰個嘅語言啊、教育啊、文化，亦都係逐漸咧被蠶食㗎。咁所以佢哋今日其中一個訴求咧，就係希望大家關注咧喺內蒙古個情況。咁當然香港人嗰個嘅情況大家都知道啦，香港今日亦都係有一個嘅大型嘅示威啦，喺全香港嘅唔同嘅地方啦，都有人咧出到嚟係反對呢一個國安法，亦都係實施咗3個月啦，亦都係有12位咧香港嘅青年啦被送中滿40日，至今仍然係音訊全無㗎。咁相信一陣間咧香港嘅代表咧亦都會喺呢一度咧提出呢個議題，希望大家關注㗎。係啦，咁其實咧，尋日咧，我哋就係已經知道啦。港人嘅一個遊說組織 HKDC 咧，就已經係提出咗啦，話有一個加強版嘅香港人權自由和選擇法案2020㗎。咁今日咧喺國會嘅眾議院外交事務委員會咧，就會係作出一個討論。咁啊，呢一個嘅新嘅加強版嘅法案咧，究竟係有咩唔同咗咧？就主要咧就係希望咧，可以用一個更加精簡同埋更加有力嘅措施，可以幫助一啲嘅要逃離香港嘅民主鬥士啊！如果嚟到美國嘅話，可以得到一個嘅暫時庇護㗎。而 HKDC 嘅總監咧朱木文咧，亦都喺尋日就係表示咧，正正因為有12個香港人被送中，所以更加係有需要向美國國會係提出要保護呢一班嘅香港嘅民主鬥士㗎。嗱，咁我哋見到現場咧，其實咧所有嘅人咧都仲係準備緊啦。咁啊，亦都係有啲人咧就係戴上咗佢哋嘅面具啊。咁其實由於呢一個嘅疫情關係啦，所有現場嘅人士咧都係規定一定要戴上口罩，同埋咧係做足一啲嘅social distance 社交距離嘅措施㗎。好啦，再同現場大家介紹一下咧，呢度就係美國華盛頓國會山莊前面嘅草地啦。咁今日咧就係全球超過60個城市嘅民眾咧，就係舉辦一個11全球反共日嘅集會。咁而家喺美國華盛頓首都呢一場嘅集會咧，可以話係規模最大嘅一場啦。咁已經見到咧，唔同種族嘅人啦，包括係藏族人啦、維吾爾族人、香港人、內蒙古人、台灣人等等咧，都係有代表嚟到呢一度表達訴求㗎。佢哋係希望咧向美國政府咧就係提出要抵制中共嘅鎮壓自由啦、民主同埋人權嘅行為㗎。咁示威人士嘅訴求咧就係包括有西藏人呢，就係反對被中共殘酷佔領佢哋嘅土地，而維吾爾族人呢，就係被任意拘留喺集中營，香港人嘅自由被剝奪啦，內蒙古嘅文化語言逐漸被一啲嘅漢化教育所蠶食，台灣人呢，就係反對被欺凌同埋恐嚇㗎，以及佢哋都係提出啦，有無數嘅中國律師被拘留、被失蹤同埋被禁聲。嗱，我哋畫面而家見到嘅呢，已經係有唔同嘅種族嘅人啦，帶咗佢哋嘅旗幟。呢一班呢，就係一啲嘅內蒙古嘅人啦，佢哋呢，有人係揸住呢寫住內蒙古獨立嘅標語，亦都係着上佢哋傳統嘅服飾。 而呢邊咧見到嘅就係一啲西藏人啦，佢就係寫住一啲 Free Tibet 解放西藏嘅標語，亦都揸上佢哋嘅旗幟。而家畫面見到嘅呢，就係維吾爾族人佢哋嘅反對嘅團體，反對中共嘅團體，佢哋都帶上佢哋嘅旗幟啦。咁佢哋呢係非常之大嘅團體，因為呢今日主辦單位呢係安排咗超過100個維吾爾族人呢，就係嚟到呢一度去扮演一個新疆集中營嗰個情況㗎。預料呢，到時佢哋就會戴上一啲嘅手銬。佢希望咧喚起大家關注咧喺新疆集中營裏邊佢哋嘅同胞、佢哋嘅族人嗰個嘅慘況㗎。咁除咗一陣間佢哋會係扮演新疆集中營嘅情況之外啦，現場亦都有一啲嘅道具去展示究竟喺新疆裏邊一啲嘅孤兒院啦、強迫墮胎、絕育中心、審訊同埋強制勞動等等嘅一啲嘅措施。
Basically, we're all on the same boat here. Yeah, that's true.
咁咧，其實原定呢一個嘅活動咧，就係11點鐘開始㗎。咁而家咧就係遲咗少少，因為咧都仲係要等緊唔同嘅團體，佢哋咧就係嚟到呢一度咧就係集合㗎。咁而家咧見到台上面咧開始有人咧就係發言啦。咁睇嚟咧嗰個嘅集會應該即將會開始㗎啦。咁預料咧一陣間咧，首先係會有唔同宗教團體嘅領袖啦，就會帶領一個嘅禱告儀式。然之後會有3位嘅眾議員啦，包括 Perry 同埋 Ted Yoho 啦，會嚟到呢度輪流發言。現場人士咧就因為呢一個嘅疫情原因啦，都係要戴上口罩啦，同埋咧主辦單位都呼籲佢哋要保持一個嘅社交距離㗎。而且現場人士大多數都見到咧係按照大會嘅呼籲咧係着上咗黑色衫，又或者咧有啲人咧就例如咧而家見到畫面前邊咧嘅左邊啦，有人着住佢哋自己民族嘅服飾。
Good morning. May I have all the guests be seated, please?
係啦，咁而家集會即將開始啦。
Do I have here Dr. Yang Lee?
¿Tú Perdona. Just want to make sure you. You have the program, right? Okay, so you know when you're about to know. I just want to make sure you all have it, right? Okay. But I'll be calling you one by one, so. Yeah. So I think we should begin. Yes.
Can we have all the guest speakers be seated, please? Thank you. I'll be starting in a minute or two.
I am Tenzing.
Hi, I'm Jake. I'm from Mr. Fauzi's office.
Oh, nice to meet you.
He'll be here at 11:30.
11:30?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll just keep on moving until he comes in, and then I'll put it right after the next speaker.
Easiest way to speak.
Okay. Yeah, we have a chair, and you probably want to reserve a chair for
We
him.
have he's got a call in.
You got
Call in, so ideally he's got to come in and speak.
Okay. All right. So if there's someone speaking, that finish, and then speak right away.
Perfect.
Okay. Thank you so much. Jake? I know it. So do you have anything I can do?
I 我现在转一下镜头啊。
Yeah, I don't have all that information.
Good morning. Kashidale. My name is Tenzing Bashi, and I'm the president of Capital Area Tibetan Association. I'm one of the coordinators for the Global Day Action Against Chinese Communist Party. Today, on October 1st, 2020, which is the 71st founding anniversary of the People's Republic of China, over 150 movement-based organizations and civil society groups representing Tibetans, Uyghurs, Hong Kongers, Southern Mongolia, Taiwanese, Chinese democracy groups are staging global protests calling on governments to take strong multilateral action in response to unprecedented human rights abuses perpetrated by the Chinese government. We gather here and protests are being organized over 60 cities covering 5 continents. This Global Day of Action is by far the largest cross-movement strategic alliance of all the groups oppressed by the CCP, coming together to fight for freedom, democracy, and human rights in China, its occupied countries, and around the world. The powerful and unprecedented display of solidarity demonstrate increasing alignment with the growing people's resistance against the Chinese government. The brutal occupation of Tibet and 500,000 Tibetans in forced labor camps, arbitrary detention of millions of Uyghurs in internment camp, loss of fundamental freedoms in Hong Kong, erasure of Southern Mongolia culture and language, intimidation and bullying of Taiwan, and the detention, disappearance, and silencing of countless Chinese lawyers and activists illustrate the scale of the existing concern across the country. After decades of our resistance to China's might, the world has finally woken up and is confronting the truth. Now is the time for us to stand united against CCP. It is time for free nations to act. Therefore, we are here in front of the United States Congress to call on the United States and world leaders to take action. Action to protect and safeguard democracy and freedom from Chinese imperialism. Today, we have representatives of all the movement and communities to raise our united voice, and it is my honor to stand beside each one of you in our fight for freedom of our people. We will also be joined by members of Congress shortly to express their support and solidarity. Let me now invite our first speaker of today's event. I'd like to invite here, up on the speaker here, Omer Kanat, Executive Director of Uyghur Human Rights Project.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. Assalamu alaikum aziz qarindoshlar. Nayt bugun hammaylan nayt yaxshi kapsizlar, nayt xush olduk ve men nayt hayajonlanib haqiqatan bunda cho'ng namoyish tunji qitim o'tkazilyapti. Bu Uyg'urlarniki mushunchalik ko'p ishtiroki bilan shuning bak hayajonliman. Today is not a day of celebration for our people. Uyghurs, Kazakhs, Tibetans, Mongolians, and even Chinese have spent 71 years under Communist Party's brutal repression. This is not our national day. This is the day of mourning for us, a day of occupation. I want to thank the organizers of Resist China Coalition that we have come together, different peoples, different groups sends a strong message. The message we are sending is the Chinese Communist Party must end its tyranny over our lives. We demand our fundamental right to exist as free and independent peoples. Xi Jinping's goal is total control of our land and domination of our society. To be Uyghur, Tibetan, Mongolian, and a dissenting Chinese is a crime. You must conform. If not, Xi told his officials, show absolute no mercy. The world needs to stop believing China will tolerate diversity. The Chinese Communist Party sees pluralism as an existential threat. The reason the party does anything is to maintain power. This has only intensified under Xi Jinping. The motivation for brutal crackdown on Uyghurs is this need for absolute power. With a separate ethno-religious identity, the Uyghurs are a threat to the Xi personality cult. The party is eliminating this threat with policies that amount nothing less than genocide. The world is watching the erasure of our language, faith, religious sites, history, knowledge, neighborhoods, and family ties. The Chinese government has arbitrarily interned millions of my people. If Uyghurs are not in concentration camps, they are in prison, forced labor factories, or open-air prisons of absolute surveillance. The world cannot be complicit. What is happening to Uyghurs matters to every one of us. The cotton grown on Uyghur land and the clothing made by Uyghur forced labor sit on store shelves around the world. Chinese companies develop and sell technologies of total surveillance tested on Uyghurs across the globe. We can become educated about these issues, but even better, we can become active in resisting these atrocity crimes. This fight will not be easy. Yet, when I see the coming together of the coalition, I have hope. I have hope because we present the very thing she in the party fear the most. That is unity and the possibility that a different future, a free future, a just future is possible. Thank you.
Okay, next, I would like to invite up on the microphone here, Tenzin Yotun, to read the press statement. She is the president of Regional Tibetan Youth Congress. Tenzin Yotun.
Good morning, all. Global groups opposing Chinese Communist Party staged the largest ever joint cross-movement action. Activists demand governments take immediate action against the Chinese Communist Party on the 71st anniversary of the founding of People's Republic of China. Washington, D.C. on the October 1st, 2020, the anniversary of the founding of the Peoples of China's Republic of China, over the 150 civil society groups representing Tibetan Uyghur, Hong Kongers, Southern Mongolia, Taiwanese and Chinese democracy groups staged the largest coordinated cross-movement action ever, calling on governments to take a strong multilateral stand in the response to unprecedented human rights abuse perpetrated by the Chinese Communist Party. On the Global Day of Action, protests taking places in 61 cities around the world in the show of international solidarity amongst Chinese human rights defenders, Tibetans, Uyghur, Hong Kongers, Southern Mongolians, and Taiwanese, are coming together to recognize the present threat posed by the CCP to communities living under its rule and for freedom, democracy, and human rights in China and globally. The legal occupation of Tibet, arbitrary detentions of millions of Uyghurs in internment camps, loss of fundamental freedoms in Hong Kong, erasure of Southern Mongolian culture and language, intimidation of bullying of Taiwanese, and the detention, disappearance, and silencing of countless Chinese lawyers and activists illustrate the scale of existing concern across the country. The issues faced by each and every community is a reflection of the CCP's blatant disregard of the rights of those living in China and its occupied countries, and the desire of Xi Jinping to consolidate power and forcibly stifle dissent. A growing chorus of voices have already begun to push back against many of these abuses. In June 2020, the Interparliamentary Alliance on China was established to promote a coordinated response between democratic states to challenge posed by the present conduct and future ambitions of the People's Republic of China. The alliance is made up of nationally elected legislators, including 36 co-chairs and 127 members from 17 countries. On June 26, more than 50 independent UN experts issued a statement denouncing China's human rights record, notably the treatment of Uyghurs and Tibetans, as well as the deteriorating situation in Hong Kong, and called for decisive measures to protect fundamental freedoms in China. In July 2019, 25 UN member states sent a letter to the High Commission for Human Rights and Human Rights Council President urging China to end mass arbitrary detentions and other violations against Uyghurs, other Turkic peoples. We are therefore calling on governments to take strong multilateral action in response to unprecedented human rights abuse perpetrated by the Chinese government, and demand China immediately fulfill its human rights obligation in all bilateral and multilateral dialogues and exchanges. establish an independent UN Human Rights Council mechanism to access and monitor the outgoing human rights violation in China, particularly in relation to East Turkestan, Tibet, Hong Kong, and Southern Mongolia. Impose targeted sanctions such as the U.S. Global Act, the Canadian Justice for Victims of Corrupt Foreign Official Act, and the UK Criminal Finances Act against senior Chinese government officials linked to human rights abuses. Impose economic sanctions on companies that are profiteering by aiding and abetting Chinese genocidal and colonial policies in Tibet and East Turkestan. Revisit government policy toward the PRC and Taiwan, urging it to revise its One China policy and support Taiwan's democracy. Condemn the PRC's military intimidation of Taiwan and support Taiwan's meaningful participation and inclusive in international organizations. Contact Doji Satan Student for Free Tibet at 646-753-3889. Thank you.
Thank you, Yadala. Next, I have here Representative Tom Swazi. Representative Swazi just is a member of the Congressional Executive Commission on China, CECC. And just yesterday, they had a hearing on the current situation in Tibet. And Congressman Swazi is also a sponsor of the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. Congressman Swazi.
Thank you and good afternoon. Ni hao. And thank you to all my friends that are here. Shukran, Tujiche, Sheshe. It's so wonderful to see all the different groups that are here together, united and wearing the same colors from all the different groups that are being persecuted by the Chinese Communist Party, whether you're the Uyghurs or the Tibetans or in Hong Kong, the Hong Kong students, the Mongolians. Thank you so much for all being united together today. The Chinese Communist Party has a plan. They've thought it out very well. They've been planning for decades. They want to have control and dominance in the world. We see it in the Belt and Road Initiative. We see it in them trying to influence so many things economically, politically, technologically, in the space, on the land, in the air, on the water. There's so many things that they want to control. And when we see how they treat their own people and the people in the region, it's not something we want to see happen in our world. It was almost 50 years ago that President Nixon went to China to try and build a relationship. And most Americans have believed for that time period that over time, the Chinese Communist Party would become more like us. They'd be exposed to our democratic system. They'd be exposed to the modern economy, and they would adopt our way of life. That simply has not happened. We see it in so many different ways. We see it with the Uyghurs. It was mentioned that we held a hearing on the Uyghurs just the other day, and we heard things like not only forced labor, but forced sterilization, forcing people to eat pork when it violates their religion, forcing people to eat when their religion dictates that they be fasting, forcing people to change their language. We had a hearing yesterday with on Tibet. It was 61 years ago that the Dalai Lama was exiled from his country. 25 years that the Panchen Lama was abducted. We saw how they took the technological monitoring of people's lives in Tibet and exported it to the Uyghurs. And now we hear more recently that there are labor camps being created for the Tibetans. We see, I think just today, 60 people arrested in Hong Kong for trying to speak out against the Chinese Communist Party and their authoritarian rule. In my home state of New York just recently, we saw a New York City police officer arrested because he was spying on the Tibetan community on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party. We see the Chinese exporting their ideas. We had a library in Elmhurst, Queens, where they were showing what they claimed was Chinese history, expunged of any of the things that we're talking about today, and expunged of much of China's history. And we had that exhibition removed. We see the influence in the Confucius centers, the funding used to try and export this ideology and this sanitized version of propaganda of what's going on in China. Thank you all for being here to help us to wake up to the reality of how the Chinese Communist Party views the individual worth of people, of how they treat people. It cannot be sanitized through new movies. It can't be sanitized by slick brochures, by sanitized versions of history. It can't be papered over in trade deals. We must recognize the threat that the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese government have not only to its own people, but to all free-loving people throughout the world. I want you to know I'll stand with you to try and expose what's going on and work together to try and bring this to the attention of the American people. Thank you very much. Tu jiche. Xie xie.
Thank you very much, Congresswazi, for taking the time to speak and support us here on this Global Day action. We appreciate your time, your precious time, sir. Thank you very much. Next, I have here as a speaker Kongo Nguduk, who is a representative of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, located here in Washington, D.C., from the Office of Tibet. Kongo.
Tashi Dilek, and good morning. I'm honored to join all of you at the Global Day of Action. 70 years ago, Chinese communists invaded Tibet. Since then, 1.2 million Tibetans have died through starvation, execution, and torture. More than 6,000 monasteries were razed to the ground. Monks were disrobed and nuns were raped. The International Commission of Jurists in 1960 reported that genocide has taken place in Tibet. Now it's happening in East Turkestan. The dire situation in Tibet continues till date, and in fact, it's becoming worse. 156 Tibetans committed self-immolation in protest. The constant mass surveillance, labor camps, arbitrary detention, and forced disappearances are the prevailing norms in Tibet and in all our communities. The whole of Tibet is a police state and under lockdown for decades. His Holiness the Dalai Lama described the situation in Tibet, quote unquote, as a hell on earth. This is a story the Chinese Communist Party has been trying to destroy, but it is a memory that Tibetan people must preserve. Tibetans and supporters have raised the alarm of CCP, their expansionist design over time, but little was done to resist the onslaughts. The economic greed and the appeasement policy by the free world emboldened the CCP and more acts of brutalities and belligerence continued and intensified. However, the recent pandemic enabled the free world to see the true color of the CCP. Now there is some sort of global awakening on the evil designs of the CCP to control the world. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said this in Los Angeles last August. I quote, "If we do not act now," he is talking to the American and world people, "ultimately the CCP will enable our freedoms and subvert the rule-based order that our societies have worked so hard to build." He further says, "If we bend our knees now, our children's children may be at the mercy of Chinese Communist Party one day." Unquote. This sums up the price the free world is paying by looking the other way. Having said that, we must also acknowledge the historic legislations passed by the U.S. Congress on Tibet, Uyghurs, Hong Kong, and Taiwan in recent times. Those were a source of tremendous inspiration for all of us. As a representative of His Holiness and Tibet administration, I would like to take this opportunity to offer my sincere gratitude to the U.S. Congress, and in particular, Congressman Jim McGovern, Senator Rubio for sponsoring the Tibet Policy and Support Act. It got passed in the House by overwhelming majority, and we are looking forward to a similar passage in the Senate as soon as possible. We know that even in the midst of pandemic, CCP has been actively implementing measures such as ethnic unity laws, Sinicization of Tibetan Buddhism, patriotic re-education of Tibetan youth, bilingual curriculum. All these are aimed to systematically wipe out identity and heritage of Tibetan people from the face of the earth, but we refuse to be eliminated. It doesn't stop there. As Congressman Tom Sauty just mentioned, they are active in the diaspora community too, trying to spy on, divide the community, and spread disinformation. The recent arrest of Chinese agent in New York and the false photo exhibition about Tibet in the public library in Queens, New York, by the New York Chinese consulate are a few examples. This kind of intrusive activities are very common to all of us here. This is why it is important more than ever for all of us, Uyghurs, Hong Kongers, Southern Mongolians, Falun Gong, Christians, Taiwanese, and Chinese citizens themselves to fight the CCP collectively. In individual numbers, we are not that many. However, if all of us stand together, we are strong. There is a strength in the numbers and force in solidarity. Therefore, I would like to earnestly congratulate the organizers of this global general action to resist China. May I also call upon the international community to stand in solidarity with us, not just for our freedom and human rights, but for your freedom and democratic values which are at stake right now as well. Thank you to the organizers, and thank you, students of Free Tibet, for giving me this opportunity to say a few words. Thank you. Tashdele.
Thank you, Ngututsenela. Next, I would like to ask Mr. Engabadu Tokoshok, Director of Southern Mongolia Human Rights and Information Center.
Semetano, good morning. My name is Engkwat Tochik. I'm from Southern Mongolia, which is one of the three nations occupied and colonized by the People's Republic of China. 71 years ago, China invaded my nation and called it a nationality minority autonomous region. During these 71 years, the Chinese colonial regime has carried out a series of heavy-handed ethnic policies, including genocide, political persecution, economic exploitation, cultural eradication, and environmental destruction. Hundreds of thousands of Mongolians lost their lives, and millions have persecuted just for being who they are. The other two nations, including Tibet and East Turkestan, are also experiencing the same tragic fate. Once free Hong Kong is now suffering under the communist regime's authoritarian rule. De facto independent sovereign nation of Taiwan is also under the threat of Chinese aggression. 1.5 billion Chinese citizens are suffering under the state terror of the communist regime. What is even more alarming is that the free world is under threat. The universal value of democracy, human rights, and human dignity is threatened by the Chinese neo-colonialism and global hegemony. The Chinese issue is no longer just the colonial occupation of Southern Mongolia, Tibet, and East Turkestan. It is a global threat. It is an existential threat to the rest of the world. The world, especially free world, including the United States, must take immediate and drastic actions before it is too late. Thank you.
Thank you, Omar. Enkabadu. Next, I would like to invite Rushan Abbas, Campaign for Uyghurs.
Thank you all for coming together here today to raise your voice for those who cannot. There is no equivalency between the Chinese regime and any other governments in the world. China does not possess a government. It does not have citizens. It is a regime that views human beings as expendable tools. It's a technologically enabled barbarism. I'm here to cry out to stop the genocide. Yes, genocide. The Uyghur people in East Turkestan are currently facing. Uyghurs, may our name also pierce not just your ears, but your heart. Our people are being exterminated. There is too many witnesses to this barbaric regime's atrocious crimes. Crimes that includes forced marriage, mass rape, forced abortions, forced sterilizations, arrest, torture, child abduction, slavery, indoctrination, brainwashing, organ harvesting, crematoria, medical experiments, genocide. The world cannot deny our cries any longer, and it cannot justify looking away. Yes, it seems the international community has invited the murderer to judge his own trial in United Nations Human Rights Council. China used its blood money and has silenced the United Nations. They have silenced the World Health Organization, the NBA, the Hollywood. They have silenced the International Olympic Committee. They have silenced the academic institutions. We cannot be silent any longer. Silence will not save you. Even complicity will not. Millions of innocent Uyghurs must be free. My sister, Dr. Gulshan Abbas, must be free. Did the CCP expect us to go silently to our graves? We will not. The Chinese regime is foolishly clinging to their evil ways. How will they be able to defend themselves? They cannot. Justice will be had, and the truth always prevail. The name of China has been ruined, and this shame will not be erased for 1,000 generations. We demand of the entire world, do not be counted wisdom. The conscience of the world is being tested today. We use our words as weapons. By them, the oppressors are condemned. The Chinese regime and the Xi Jinping have shown that they will fear most our words and the thoughts which lead us to action like this today. May their worst fear be realized as citizens of the world unite in saying, resist China. I am here to warn the world. The fate of the Uyghurs is what stands before us all, unless if we act now. We must unite against this authoritarian monster to save the soul of the humanity. Thank you.
Thank you, Roshan. Next, I'd like to ask Christina Olney from Victim of Communists to speak a few words.
Good morning. Thank you all so much for being here. It is an honor to be standing with you. Today marks the 71st anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party's rise to power. The same Marxist-Leninist regime that has killed tens of millions of its people since its founding, including crushing peaceful protesters in Tiananmen Square 31 years ago, is still ruling in Beijing today. And under the leadership of Xi Jinping, it has become an even more repressive and tyrannical regime. From Xinjiang to Tibet to Mongolia to Hong Kong, Beijing is crushing the human rights and fundamental freedoms of all the provinces and peoples under its control. In Xinjiang, there are up to 3 million Uyghurs in detention camps who are being forced to renounce their religion, being subjected to forced labor, and from a recent groundbreaking report by my colleague Adrian Zenz, which was based largely on Chinese government data, we now know that at least 80% of Uyghur women of childbearing age are being subjected to forced sterilization. Many experts have agreed that these policies constitute genocide. Since Beijing invaded Tibet in 1950, the CCP has been waging a systematic campaign to erase Tibetan culture and religion, destroying thousands of monasteries, preventing the passing on of the Tibetan language, and even controlling their religious authorities. You heard this morning that it has been 61 years since the Dalai Lama was exiled from his homeland, and 25 years since the Chinese Communist Party's abduction of the Panchen Lama. In Hong Kong, Beijing has crushed the one country, two systems policy with the institution of the national security law this past June. The once free city, which served as a beacon of liberty in the region, has now become merely another province of communist China, another East Berlin, and a bleak example of communist oppression. We are gathered here today on this anniversary to resist the Chinese Communist Party and to stand for the freedom and human rights of all peoples across China. No tyranny can survive forever. The 20th century is proof of that. Many thought that the Soviet Union would never fall. Yet today, captive nations once under its control are prosperous democracies. The same fate will one day befall the Chinese Communist Party. And Tibetans, Uyghurs, Mongolians, and Hong Kongers, and all other peoples in China will be free. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Yes, we will all be free one day. Next, I'd like to ask Joyce Ho to come up here and speak a few words. Joyce Ho is a Hong Kong student activist. Joyce?
Hello, everybody. Thank you. My name is Joyce Ho, and I am 18 years old. I'm an American Hong Konger from New York City. I am the creator of Project Black Mask and a member of NY4HK, New Yorkers for Hong Kong. I want to thank you all for having me here today. Over the past year, Hong Kong has become the home of a humanitarian crisis because it is under attack by its own government that has been serving as a puppet to the CCP. Hong Kong was promised autonomy for 50 years under the Sino-British Joint Declaration of 1984. And it has only been 23 years since the handover of 1997, and the agreements made between the Chinese and the British government in this declaration are already being violated. The Hong Kong police force, Hong Kong government, and the CCP have committed unspeakable crimes to the people of Hong Kong. Since the anti-extradition bill protests of 2019, the Hong Kong police force has been using extreme police brutality to silence the voices of protesters. The Chinese and Hong Kong governments have approved of the police force acts of violence and have ignored the protests of approximately 3 million Hong Kongers. I am here today to represent the Hong Kong people in protesting against the Chinese government. And on this global day of action, we are proud to show them that we will not stand down until we win. In addition to this, I am here today to represent and tell the younger generation that we can make a difference. The Hong Kong protests are primarily fueled by the youth, and it really goes to show how influential and powerful the youth voice can be. It is our duty to support pro-democracy and human rights movements because we are the future of this world. There are so many ways for us youngsters to show the world that we are capable. For example, I created Project Black Mask Hong Kong on Facebook and YouTube as a platform for the international community to show solidarity with Hong Kong and every single group represented here today, and to update all the followers on horrific events happening in Hong Kong, such as the 12 young Hong Kongers who were taken and detained by the CCP for 40 days and counting. There have been too many instances where we have seen the influence of the CCP on a global level. And it goes without saying that they should have absolutely no jurisdiction over any other place in this world. Their evil tactics and ideals are seeping into this country, and I guarantee that there will be negative consequences. Hong Kongers have started a new campaign called #WeAreAllHongKongers to highlight the fact that the danger that the CCP poses to our world has effectively made us all Hong Kongers. Because now it is not only Hong Kongers who are in danger, but every single person on this planet. Every person on this planet is in danger if the Chinese government gains any more power. As Martin Luther King Jr. once said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. As people of the world, we have a duty to fight against injustice and stand with Hong Kong and all of the other groups that are represented here today. The CCP absolutely does not and will not own this world, and we have the power to show them that. Thank you.
Thank you, Joyce. What the young activists are doing in Hong Kong are very inspiring for all of us. Thank you very much. Next, I would like to ask you to turn your attentions behind you. The Uyghur American Association is going to stage a political theater. Please turn your attention behind you at the political theater.
Amerika'nın bayraklarını eviteyleyendi, hepimiz okturumuz ha. Amerika'nın bayraklarını eviteyleyendi, hepimiz okturumuz. Hatta rahat bolsaçına okturuvereyli, olsun lekin közümden itik olsun. Resimlerini yakıp okuyaylı. Resimde tutmamız yakıp okuyaylı.
你没有爸爸妈妈在这里了 You cannot be here. You have no mother. You have no father. Get over here. You have no mother here. Get over here. Off to the orphanage for you.
What is this? What is this? Take it off. Ha! They call this culture. Look at you. You have no mother. You have no father. Over here. No filming here.
Kötü adam saya bulunmaz. Kötü adam saya bulunmaz. We have an Uyghur
We face this way.
to the camp. Right over here.
Head down.
I'm Nur Minute, 25 years old. Crime? Refusing to marry a Chinese government official. Stand up straight. Head down.
Aygül Mehmet, 25 yaş, Cünayt'e Xitoy hukumati xodimi bilan to'y qilishni rad qilgan.
No mercy! 30 years old!
嗱咁咧，其實咧喺現場咧，頭先都見到啦，就係上演咗一個咧係扮演喺新疆集中營嗰個情況㗎。咁就係模擬咗啦，過百人咧喺呢度咧就模擬咧喺集中營嘅時候咧，要用手扣扣住佢哋手啦，而小朋友咧亦都係要被逼同佢哋嘅父母分離㗎，揾唔翻佢哋嘅家人啦，而且仲係咧要脫下佢哋嗰個嘅民族服飾，去學一啲嘅漢族嘅文化㗎。咁咧就會見到咧就係除咗維吾爾族人之外啦，亦都見到有西藏嘅人啦。啱啱我哋聽演講嘅時候，香港人都有上台去發言啦，就係表達翻咧香港警方喺香港人去爭取自由嗰陣時咧，係武力鎮壓佢哋嘅集會嗰個嘅問題㗎。咁我哋自由亞洲電台咧會喺現場同大家跟進住成個集會啦，亦都會咧稍後有跟進報導嘅。多謝大家收睇。
Who is our next victim? Qadri Min? Look me in the eyes, boy. 20 years old? What was your crime?
Calling overseas relatives.
That's not loud enough! Okay. What's your crime?
I call my family overseas.
You disgust me. No mercy! Repeat after me, no mercy!